A waitress smirks as she loudly announces, "Coffee here is $3, to an elderly man with trembling hands clutching a worn wallet. The diner falls silent as a dark figure rises from the corner booth. Keanu Reeves approaches, his eyes flashing with recognition. "Professor Winters, you're the reason I have a career." The waitress freezes, her smirk vanishing as she realizes the devastating mistake she's made. "Where are you watching from? Tell us in the comments." Welcome to Motivation for Success, where moments like these reveal the hidden power of kindness. The afternoon arrived wrapped in sheets of gray rain, water droplets racing down the windows of Miller's diner like tears on tired cheeks. The small establishment stood as it had for decades, a weathered sentinel on the corner of Main and Elm in a town too small to be remembered by outsiders but large enough to harbor the full spectrum of human character. Outside, the world washed away in monochrome inside, the golden glow of vintage pendant lights cast long shadows across faded red booths and countertops worn smooth by generations of elbows and coffee cups. The rain had kept most people home that day, leaving the diner in that peculiar state between empty and occupied, just enough patrons to create ambient conversation but not enough to drown out the gentle percussion of raindrops against glass. Those who had braved the weather sat scattered throughout the space like islands, a couple in hushed conversation near the back, a woman with papers sprawled across her table, a solitary man in a dark jacket nursing a coffee in the far corner, his features partially obscured by the shadow cast from the overhead light. The door's hinges announced a new arrival with a plaintive cry, followed by the cheerful contradiction of the bell's jingle. Standing in the threshold was an elderly man, perhaps in his early 80s, his silhouette momentarily backlit by a flash of lightning that transformed him into something almost ethereal before he stepped fully into the diner's amber light. Time had carved its signature across his face in a network of deep lines that spoke of both laughter and sorrow. His eyes, a faded blue that suggested they had once been vibrant, peered out from beneath bushy white eyebrows with a kind of watchful weariness. He wore a beige trench coat darkened by rain at the shoulders, and beneath it, a carefully pressed shirt and cardigan that had clearly been chosen with dignity rather than fashion in mind. His pants, though clean and ironed, showed the subtle shine of fabric worn thin by years. Most telling were his shoes, polished to a respectable gleam but bearing the unmistakable scars of extensive repair. As he made his way toward an empty booth by the window, the diner's atmosphere shifted imperceptibly. Conversations dipped momentarily as eyes followed his progress, some curious, others dismissive. A young man at the counter nudged his companion, whispering something that elicited a stifled laugh. An older woman glanced up from her crossword puzzle, her expression momentarily softening before returning to her distraction. The man in the corner booth raised his eyes briefly, observing the newcomer over the rim of his coffee cup. The elderly man moved with the careful deliberation of someone who had learned the hard way about the consequences of falling. Each step was measured, purposeful, his right hand gripping a wooden cane not as a fashion statement but as a necessity. Despite his obvious physical limitations, there was an unmistakable dignity in how he carried himself, shoulders back, chin lifted, as if silently refusing to apologize for the space he occupied in the world. He selected a booth near the large front window, one that offered a view of the rain-slicked street where occasional cars passed with headlights gleaming against the wet asphalt. Removing his coat with methodical care, he folded it neatly beside him rather than hanging it on the metal hook that would have required reaching too high. The movement revealed a gold watch on his wrist, not ostentatious, but clearly of quality and significant age, perhaps a relic from more prosperous times or a treasured gift from long ago. The diner had settled back into its rhythm when Chloe approached his table. She was perhaps 22, with vibrant pink-streaked blonde hair pulled into a messy bun and multiple piercings that caught the light when she moved. Her uniform, a blue dress with a white apron, seemed at odds with her otherwise rebellious aesthetic. The name tag pinned slightly askew on her chest proclaimed, "Chloe," in faded black letters. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone carrying the artificial brightness of someone who had already decided the interaction wouldn't be worth her time. She didn't reach for her notepad, her hip cocked to one side in a stance that communicated clear impatience. The old man looked up, his eyes crinkling at the corners with the ghost of a smile. "Good afternoon," he replied, his voice carrying the slight tremor of age but retaining the clear diction of someone who had once commanded attention. "I would very much appreciate a cup of coffee, if you'd be so kind. And perhaps a menu, when you have a moment." Chloe's painted eyebrows arched slightly. She glanced around the diner before leaning in, speaking with exaggerated clarity as if addressing someone hard of hearing, or worse, slow of understanding. "You know, coffee here is almost $3, she said, her voice elevated enough to carry to nearby tables. "And our specials start at 13. Just wanted to make sure you're in the right place." The emphasis she placed on "right place" carried an unmistakable subtext: perhaps you've wandered somewhere beyond your means. Several patrons looked up, some with uncomfortable expressions, others with thinly veiled amusement. Near the register, another waitress, older, with streaks of gray in her dark hair, frowned slightly but said nothing, continuing to polish silverware with single-minded focus. The old man's expression remained unchanged, though something flickered briefly in his eyes, a momentary wound quickly masked. His spotted hands, with their prominent veins and arthritic knuckles, reached carefully for the worn leather wallet in his breast pocket. "I believe I can manage a cup of coffee," he said quietly, with gentle firmness. His movements were deliberate as he extracted a crisp $20 bill, perhaps prepared in advance for this very outing. "And I would still appreciate seeing a menu, if it's not too much trouble." Chloe made no move to take the proffered bill. Instead, she rolled her eyes with dramatic effect, spinning on her heel in a manner that invited the continued amusement of those watching. "Sure thing," she called over her shoulder. "One coffee coming right up." As she walked away, laughter rippled through nearby tables, not uproarious, but the quiet, comfortable chuckling of those who feel safely removed from the target of their amusement. The old man smoothed the bill on the table before him, then folded his hands atop it, waiting with the patient resignation of someone long accustomed to such treatment. In the corner, the solitary man in the black jacket set down his coffee cup with deliberate care, his dark eyes following Chloe's retreat to the counter. There exists a particular cruelty unique to public humiliation, one that inflicts its damage not only through the primary actor but through the silent complicity of witnesses. It arrives in small gestures, a smirk poorly concealed, a whispered comment behind raised hands, the deliberate aversion of eyes that might otherwise offer solidarity. Such moments accumulate like invisible bruises on the spirit, too often borne by those least deserving of such wounds. When Chloe returned several minutes later, she carried the coffee cup with obvious carelessness, liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. She set it down with enough force to send some spilling onto the saucer beneath, then tossed a menu beside it with little ceremony. "Careful, it's hot," she announced unnecessarily, her tone suggesting she was fulfilling some mandatory warning rather than expressing genuine concern. Then, without waiting for a response, she called across the diner to a coworker, "Hey, Jen. Remember that guy last week who sat for 3 hours ordering nothing but water? Said he was waiting for someone who never showed?" Her voice had the deliberate projection of someone ensuring their audience was sufficiently broad. Jen, a younger waitress with a high ponytail, giggled in response. "Oh my God, yeah. Left like 25 cents as a tip after taking up the table forever." More laughter followed, and though neither server had explicitly identified the elderly man as the subject of their mockery, the implication hung in the air, unmistakable and pointed. The old professor wrapped his fingers around the warm cup, drawing from it what comfort he could find in a situation rapidly stripped of dignity. He sipped his coffee slowly, gazing out at the rain, which had softened to a misty drizzle. Yellowed streetlights had begun to glow prematurely in the gray afternoon, their reflections creating halos on the wet pavement. Occasionally, he would turn a page of the menu, studying it with the careful consideration of someone making calculations beyond the mere selection of food. Minutes stretched into a half hour. The atmosphere in the diner had grown strangely charged, as if the air itself had become a conductor for unspoken tensions. When the elderly man finally closed his menu and set it aside, having consumed only the single cup of coffee, Chloe approached again, this time with the check. She placed, almost slammed, the slip of paper onto the table. "Just so you know, refills aren't free," she said, though he had not requested one. The statement hung in the air like an accusation of a crime not committed. With methodical care, the old man reached again for his wallet. His movements were unhurried yet precise, like someone performing a ritual that required specific attention. As he did so, a subtle change rippled through the diner's atmosphere, something almost imperceptible at first, like the first tremor before an earthquake. The man in the black jacket had risen to his feet. There was nothing theatrical about the movement, no chair scraped dramatically backward, no utensils clattered to announce his intention. He simply stood, with the fluid economy of motion that spoke of physical confidence and purpose. As he moved toward the elderly man's table, conversations throughout the diner faltered. The ambient noise of silverware against plates diminished. All eyes tracked his progress. Recognition dawned in stages across different faces, first confusion, then widening eyes, followed by hurried whispers behind raised hands. By the time he reached the old man's table, the diner had fallen into a hush so complete that the gentle patter of rain outside seemed suddenly pronounced. It was Keanu Reeves. Not Keanu as most would recognize him from movie posters or premiere photographs, with styled hair and designer suits. This was Keanu as few ever saw him, in simple dark jeans and a well-worn black jacket, his hair slightly disheveled from the rain, several days' worth of stubble shadowing his jaw. He wore no sunglasses, no visible security, nothing to announce his status except the unmistakable presence that fame unwittingly bestows even on its most reluctant recipients. Without hesitation, he placed a hand on the elderly man's shoulder, not the performative gesture of a celebrity aware of an audience, but the natural movement of someone greeting an old friend. The contact was gentle yet familiar, his fingers resting lightly on the weathered fabric of the cardigan. The old man looked up, momentary confusion crossing his features as he tried to place the face before him. A series of emotions flickered across his expression, puzzlement, the strain of recollection, and then, like sunshine breaking through clouds, dawning recognition. Keanu leaned down slightly, his voice carrying the rich timbre of genuine emotion. "Professor Winters," he said, the name emerging not as a question but as a statement filled with respect and affection. "I thought it was you." For a long moment, the elderly man simply stared, lost in the disorienting space between memory and present reality. Then his face transformed, years seeming to fall away as recognition fully blossomed. "Keanu?" he whispered, his voice carrying the fragility of disbelief. Around them, the diner had become a tableau of frozen figures. Forks remained suspended between plates and mouths. A coffee pot hovered motionless above a cup. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Chloe stood transfixed, her face draining of color as the implications of the scene before her began to register. With natural grace that suggested no awareness of the audience, Keanu slid into the booth across from Professor Winters. His posture was relaxed yet attentive, the position of someone settling in for a conversation worth having. "It's been too long," he said, his voice pitched only for the professor but carrying in the unnatural silence of the diner. "How have you been?" Professor Winters placed his trembling hands flat on the table as if needing the stability. I've been well enough," he managed, emotion thickening his voice. "Still breathing, still thinking." That's something at my age. A smile transformed his face, revealing the younger man he had once been. But you, look at you. You've done so well. A shadow of something, perhaps sadness, perhaps modesty, crossed Keanu's features. Because of you, he replied simply. Then, seeming to become aware of the stillness that had descended upon the diner, Keanu turned slightly in his seat. His gaze swept the room, making brief eye contact with several patrons. When he spoke again, his voice carried easily without being raised, the practiced projection of an actor who understood the power of understatement. This man, he began, gesturing toward Professor Winters with a motion that conveyed profound respect, is the reason I have a career at all. The collective intake of breath around the diner was audible. Professor Winters shook his head in modest denial, but Keanu continued, his expression earnest. When I was 22, I was part of the Young Actors program at the Berkeley Arts Center. I was, struggling is putting it mildly. A self-deprecating smile touched his lips. I was terrible. Stiff, uncertain, constantly forgetting lines. Most of the instructors had written me off. He leaned forward slightly, his focus entirely on the elderly man across from him. But not Professor Thomas Winters. He stayed after classes. Hours after everyone had gone home. Working with me on the same monologues over and over until I stopped just reciting words and started finding truth in them. Professor Winters' eyes had grown moist. He reached across the table, briefly covering Keanu's hand with his own gnarled fingers. You had it in you all along, he said softly. All I did was help you find it. Keanu shook his head, his expression serious. You did far more than that. His gaze returned to the captivated audience around them. During my third month in the program, I auditioned for a part one desperately wanted. I prepared for weeks. Professor Winters helped me craft every nuance of that audition. His voice took on a quality of remembered pain. I didn't get the part. Not even a callback. Around the diner, several people leaned forward unconsciously, drawn into the narrative. I was devastated, Keanu continued. Ready to quit not just the program but acting entirely. I was sitting alone after the rejection, in the empty theater, when Professor Winters found me. He paused, his eyes distant with memory. He sat down beside me, didn't say anything for a long time. Then he told me something I've carried with me through every rejection, every setback, every dark moment since. Keanu's voice took on the cadence of someone quoting words burnished by years of reflection. We never know the battles others are fighting. The only response that never fails is kindness. The simple profundity of the statement seemed to expand through the diner, settling over the listeners like a gentle revelation. Several people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, gazes dropping to their hands or plates. He told me that the director who rejected me had just lost his wife to cancer, Keanu continued. That perhaps my audition wasn't what he needed that day, but that didn't mean I hadn't given something worthwhile. That the measure of success isn't always getting what we want, but in how we handle not getting it. Professor Winters was openly weeping now, silent tears tracing paths down his lined cheeks. The years had clearly done nothing to diminish the memory or its significance. Without him, Keanu said, his voice gathering conviction, there would be no career. No films. Nothing you might recognize me from would exist. His gaze settled briefly, purposefully, on Chloe, who stood frozen beside the counter, her face a study in mortification. Without Professor Winters believing in me when no one else did, including myself, I would have become another statistic. Another dream abandoned. The silence that followed was profound. Where laughter had once rippled through the space at the old man's expense, there was now only the weight of collective shame. The rain outside had stopped completely, allowing weak sunlight to penetrate the cloud cover, casting long golden rays through the front windows. Professor Winters cleared his throat gently, clearly uncomfortable being the center of such attention. "You give me far too much credit, Keanu," he said, his voice stronger now, revealing hints of the classroom authority he must once have possessed. "You were always extraordinary. You simply needed someone to notice." The words hung in the air, a gentle indictment of everyone present who had failed to offer the same courtesy to the elderly man himself. Keanu's smile was warm as he reached into his jacket pocket and extracted a small white card. "I'm in town filming just outside the city limits," he explained, sliding the card across to Professor Winters. "We're shooting some scenes tomorrow that could really benefit from your expertise." The professor's eyes widened. "My expertise? Surely you don't." "I absolutely do," Keanu interrupted gently. "We have several young actors in supporting roles who are struggling with exactly the issues I once had. Technical skill but no emotional truth." His expression grew animated with genuine enthusiasm. "Having you there, even for a day, would be invaluable. These kids need the kind of wisdom and heart that only you can offer." Professor Winters' hand trembled as he accepted the card. I would be honored," he managed, his voice thick with emotion. "The honor would be ours," Keanu replied, then glanced at his watch. "My car should be outside by now. May I offer you a ride somewhere?" "That's very kind," the professor said, gathering his cane. "I live at the Riverside Senior Apartments. It's not far." "I know exactly where that is," Keanu said, standing and offering a supportive arm with natural ease. "Let me help you with your coat." As Keanu assisted the older man, treating the simple act with the care and reverence it deserved, the diner remained suspended in collective silence. The contrast was stark, the earlier mockery now replaced by witness to genuine respect. It was as if everyone present had been granted an unexpected opportunity to see beyond surfaces into something more essential about human connection. Professor Winters stood with Keanu's assistants, gathering his dignity around him like a cloak. When his gaze swept across the diner, there was no triumph in his expression, no vindication, only the quiet wisdom of someone who had long ago learned to see beyond immediate appearances. Together, they moved toward the exit, Keanu's pace automatically adjusting to accommodate the professor's slower gait. His hand remained supportively at the older man's elbow, not guiding but accompanying, the gesture of someone who understood that dignity often resides in the subtlest of human courtesies. They had nearly reached the door when Chloe lurched into motion, her face flushed with mortification and regret. She hurried after them, her earlier swagger completely evaporated. "Wait," she called, her voice stripped of its previous condescension. I'm so sorry. I didn't know who you were." Professor Winters paused, turning toward her with surprising gentleness in his expression. There was no anger there, no righteous indignation, only the calm understanding of someone who had witnessed enough of life to comprehend its complex motivations. "That's precisely the problem, my dear," he said softly, his voice carrying no hint of rebuke despite the weight of his words. "We rarely know, until we choose to see." The profound simplicity of his statement seemed to strike Chloe with physical force. She blinked rapidly, her carefully applied makeup now threatened by gathering tears. The professor reached out, patting her hand with surprising tenderness, a gesture so gracious, so completely devoid of the resentment he would have been entitled to feel, that several onlookers looked away, unable to bear witness to such undeserved mercy. "Everyone makes mistakes," he added quietly. "The measure of character lies in what we learn from them." Without waiting for her response, he turned back toward the door where Keanu waited patiently. Together, they stepped outside into the transformed afternoon. The storm had fully cleared, leaving behind a peculiar golden light that sometimes follows rain, a luminosity that seems to outline ordinary objects with unexpected significance. As they moved down the sidewalk, their silhouettes were momentarily backlit by the brilliant sunlight, transforming them into iconic figures against the glistening street. Inside the diner, the silence lingered like a physical presence. Then, gradually, life resumed, though markedly subdued. Conversations restarted in hushed tones. Silverware clinked gently against plates. The routine of the establishment reasserted itself, yet something had undeniably shifted in the collective atmosphere. Chloe stood motionless by the door for several moments before slowly returning to her station. As she passed the booth where Professor Winters had sat, she paused, noticing something left behind. On the table lay not only the $20 bill, far more than necessary for a single cup of coffee, but also a napkin with writing on it. With trembling fingers, she picked it up. Written in a shaky but elegant script were the words, "Your smile would be even more beautiful if it came from your heart, Professor T.W." She stared at the message, then carefully folded the napkin and tucked it into her apron pocket. It would remain there long after her shift ended, a physical reminder of a lesson more valuable than any tip she had ever received. As she turned toward the counter, she caught the eye of the older waitress who had watched the entire scene unfold without comment. Something passed between them, an unspoken understanding, perhaps, or the recognition of a shared failing now acknowledged. "I'll take care of table 7, Chloe said quietly, gesturing toward a newly arrived couple. The older waitress nodded, her expression softening. "We all have those days," she replied simply. "Tomorrow's another chance." Throughout the remainder of the afternoon, patrons would come and go, many unaware of the extraordinary scene that had transpired. Yet for those who had witnessed it, something had changed, not dramatically, perhaps, but in the subtle recalibration of perspective that sometimes follows unexpected revelation. The following morning, local social media would explode with accounts of Keanu Reeves's appearance at Miller's Diner. Photos would circulate, stories would be shared, embellished, disputed. The diner would experience a sudden surge in popularity, with visitors hoping to sit in Keanu's booth or Professor Winters' seat. Yet beneath the celebrity excitement ran a deeper current, one that resonated particularly with those who had been present. The story that spread among them wasn't merely about a famous actor's surprise appearance, it was about the quiet dignity of an elderly man, the casual cruelty that had been directed at him, and the powerful object lesson in kindness that had unfolded before their eyes. Chloe would report to work the following day with a noticeable difference in her demeanor. Her interactions with elderly customers would take on a patience and attention previously absent. The napkin would remain in her possession for years, eventually framed in her first apartment, then her first house, a constant reminder that sometimes the most profound lessons arrive in the most unexpected packages. As for Professor Winters, he did indeed visit the film set the next day. Several crew members would later share stories of the elderly gentleman who commanded surprising respect from their famous lead actor, how he spoke with such insight to the young supporting cast that many were moved to tears, how his presence seemed to elevate the entire day's work. 3 months later, when the film premiered, attentive viewers would notice a special thanks in the credits, to Professor Thomas Winters, who taught me that the only response that never fails is kindness. True worth, as demonstrated that rainy afternoon, is never measured by appearances, fame, or fortune. It is measured by the lives we touch, the dignity we recognize in others, and the kindness we choose to offer, especially when no one else is watching. In a world increasingly defined by superficial judgments and hasty conclusions, the story of Keanu Reeves and Professor Winters serves as a powerful reminder: we never truly know the battles others are fighting or the magnificent stories hidden behind ordinary facades. The simple choice to see beyond appearances, to offer kindness where condescension might be easier, can transform not only a moment but potentially a life. Kindness costs nothing. Its absence costs everything. And its presence, as demonstrated in a small town diner on a rainy afternoon, can illuminate the world in ways that no fame or fortune ever could. As Professor Winters himself might say, we rarely know until we choose to see. And in that choice, that deliberate decision to look beyond surfaces into the dignity inherent in every human being, lies the true measure of character and the enduring power of compassion. A sympathetic glance, an encouraging word at just the right moment, sometimes these can mean the entire world to a person. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more real-life stories that inspire change. Together, let's choose to see, and choose to be kind. And don't forget to subscribe to the Motivation for Success channel to help spread these beautiful values to even more people.